A boy took home a broken horse. What they achieved together shocked everyone. This is the story of Ethan, a determined 12-year-old who saw hope where no one else did. When he looked at Rusty, a neglected horse deemed worthless, he didn't see failure. He saw a chance to create something extraordinary. What happened next will move you in ways you never expected. The air was thick with the mingling smells of fresh hay, popcorn, and the metallic tang of livestock. Crowds of people moved through the city fair, their voices rising and falling in a chaotic hum. Ethan stood at the edge of the horse auction pen, his hands stuffed into the pockets of his worn jeans, his heart racing as he scanned the restless animals inside. At just 12 years old, Ethan wasn't like the other kids his age. While they spent their weekends playing video games or riding bikes, Ethan found solace in the ranch his family had struggled to maintain since his father's passing. The barn was old, the fields overgrown, but it was a place that reminded him of his dad, a man who believed that hard work and kindness could solve almost anything. Today was different. Ethan had begged his mother to bring him to the fair, knowing the horse auction was happening. His eyes darted from one horse to another, all of them strong, healthy, and ready for work. But one horse caught his attention, a frail, dull-coated animal standing apart from the rest. The horse's ribs jutted out like thin ridges under its lifeless brown coat. Its eyes, half hidden beneath a messy forelock, held a sadness Ethan couldn't ignore. The other bidders barely glanced at the poor creature, muttering things like, worthless, or not fit for anything but a pasture. Ethan's chest tightened. He didn't see a worthless horse. He saw a life that deserved a chance. He took a step closer, gripping the auction pen's wooden fence tightly. That one, he whispered under his breath, more to himself than anyone else. The auctioneer's voice boomed as he pointed to the frail horse. All right, folks, we've got a real fixer-upper here. Who'll start the bidding at $50? Silence fell over the crowd. People exchanged amused glances, some laughing under their breath. No one's gonna waste their money on that, someone muttered. Ethan swallowed hard and raised his hand. Gasps rippled through the crowd as heads turned toward him. You serious, kid? A man called out. That horse won't make it a month. Ethan ignored the jeers, his eyes locked on the horse. $50, he said firmly, his voice louder this time. The auctioneer blinked, surprised, but pleased. We've got 50. Anyone for 60? Silence. Sold. The gavel came down, and the horse was officially his. Ethan's heart pounded as he climbed into the pen. The horse stood motionless, its head hanging low. Ethan reached out a trembling hand, brushing his fingers against its coarse mane. The horse flinched slightly but didn't pull away. I'll take care of you, Ethan murmured. I promise. As he led the horse out of the pen, the whispers and laughter of the crowd followed him. His mother, standing by the edge of the auction ring, looked at him with a mix of concern and pride. Are you sure about this, Ethan? She asked gently. Ethan nodded, his jaw set with determination. He needs me, Mom. The two of them walked home slowly, Ethan holding the horse's lead rope with care. The townsfolk continued to stare as they passed, shaking their heads in disbelief. By the time they reached the family's small ranch, the horse was stumbling with exhaustion. Ethan guided him into a small paddock near the barn, where fresh hay and a bucket of water waited. The horse hesitated, then lowered his head to drink. What are you gonna name him? His mother asked. Ethan thought for a moment, watching the horse's shaky movements. Rusty, he said finally, because he might be worn out. Now, but I think he's got something left. His mother smiled faintly, brushing a strand of hair from Ethan's face. You've got your dad's heart, you know that. Ethan didn't respond, but her words stayed with him. As he stood by the paddock, watching Rusty take his first cautious steps around his new home, Ethan felt something stir deep inside. He didn't just want to help Rusty, he needed to. It felt like the only way to prove that even the broken could be whole again. The first few days with Rusty were harder than Ethan had imagined. The horse barely moved, his head hanging low as if the weight of his past had worn him down. Ethan spent hours sitting by the paddock, watching Rusty and trying to figure out how to help him. He had no experience with sick or injured animals, but something deep inside told him to keep trying. "Come on, Rusty," Ethan said softly. One morning, holding a bucket of fresh oats. "You've got to eat. You're not going to get better if you don't." Rusty flicked his ears at Ethan's voice but didn't approach. His bony frame swayed slightly as he shifted his weight from one trembling leg to another. Ethan sighed, setting the bucket down near the water trough before stepping back to give Rusty space. "It's here if you want it, buddy." Ethan didn't just sit and wait. He started learning. He borrowed old horse care books from the small local library and spent hours flipping through their yellowed pages at the kitchen table. His mom helped when she could, but money was tight, and Ethan knew he had to be resourceful. He read about nutrition, grooming, and how to recognize signs of stress or pain. Every piece of advice felt like a puzzle piece that might help put Rusty back together. By the third day, Ethan noticed a small change. As he approached the paddock with a bucket of water, Rusty lifted his head slightly. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give Ethan hope. "You're watching me now," Ethan said with a grin. "That's a good start." That evening, Ethan sat cross-legged just outside the paddock, reading aloud from one of the books he'd borrowed. His voice was calm and steady as he read about how horses communicate through body language. "You know," Ethan said, glancing up from the book, "you've got to tell me what you're feeling. That's what it says here. Horses aren't good at hiding how they feel. I guess that makes us pretty similar." Rusty didn't move, but his ears twitched in Ethan's direction. The boy's heart swelled. It wasn't much, but it was something. The next morning brought the first real breakthrough. Ethan carried a bucket of oats and carrots into the paddock, his steps slow and deliberate. Rusty watched him, his dark eyes following every movement. Ethan stopped a few feet away and knelt down, holding out a single carrot. "Here, boy," he whispered. "Just one bite." Rusty hesitated, his ears flicking back and forth. Then, slowly, he took a step forward. Ethan held his breath as Rusty's nose bumped against his outstretched hand. For a moment, the world seemed to hold still. Rusty sniffed the carrot before gently taking it from Ethan's fingers. Ethan let out a laugh, the sound bursting from him before he could stop it. "You did it," he exclaimed. "I knew you could." Rusty chewed slowly, his eyes meeting Ethan's for the first time. There was something in that gaze, something cautious but curious, as if he was beginning to wonder if this boy could really be trusted. From that moment, Ethan's days revolved around Rusty. He woke up early to clean the paddock, prepare Rusty's food, and brush his matted coat. The work was exhausting, but Ethan didn't mind. With each passing day, Rusty seemed to grow stronger. His steps became steadier, and his coat began to shine under the sunlight. Ethan's mother watched from the kitchen window, her heart swelling with pride as she saw her son's determination. "He's just like his father," she murmured to herself, "stubborn in all the right ways." But not everyone was as encouraging. One afternoon, while Ethan was at the feed store picking up supplies, he overheard two older boys talking. "That's the kid with the broken horse," one of them said, loud enough for Ethan to hear. "I don't know why he bothers. That thing's better off as dog food." Ethan's cheeks burned, but he didn't say anything. He grabbed his supplies and left, his fists clenched tight around the bag of oats. As he walked home, he thought about what the boys had said. Maybe they were right. Maybe Rusty really was too far gone. But when he got back to the paddock, Rusty was waiting for him. The horse stepped closer to the fence, his ears pricking forward as Ethan approached. Ethan stopped, his doubts melting away as he looked into Rusty's eyes. "I don't care what they say," Ethan said firmly, reaching out to stroke Rusty's neck. "We're gonna prove them wrong." Ethan's morning started before the sun rose, the cool air biting at his cheeks as he slipped into his boots and made his way to the paddock. Rusty was waiting for him now, his ears perking up at the sound of Ethan's approach. It had become their routine, a soft, "Good morning, buddy," followed by the sound of oats and carrots being poured into a bucket. Today's gonna be a good day, Ethan said as he brushed Rusty's coat. The horse stood still, his muscles no longer tense under Ethan's touch. The dull brown fur was starting to regain its sheen, and Ethan couldn't help but smile at the progress. You're looking pretty sharp, Rusty, almost like you believe we can do this. But the road to recovery wasn't without its challenges. One afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to try leading Rusty out of the paddock. He clipped a lead rope to the horse's halter, his grip firm but gentle. "All right, boy, let's stretch those legs," he said, giving the rope a light tug. Rusty hesitated, his hooves digging into the dirt. Ethan could feel the tension in the rope as the horse resisted, his head pulling back sharply. "Easy, Rusty," Ethan murmured, his voice calm and soothing. "It's just a little walk." After a few minutes of coaxing, Rusty took a cautious step forward. Then another. Ethan moved slowly, walking ahead while keeping the rope slack to give Rusty some space. They made their way out of the paddock and onto the grassy path that led toward the open field behind the barn. "See, not so bad," Ethan said, glancing over his shoulder. Rusty's ears twitched, and for a moment, the boy felt a surge of pride. But just as they reached the edge of the field, a loud bang shattered the quiet, a neighbor's truck backfiring on the nearby road. Rusty froze, his muscles stiffening like coiled springs. Before Ethan could react, the horse reared up, with his front hooves pawing at the air. Ethan stumbled backward, his hands gripping the lead rope tightly. "Whoa, easy, boy," he shouted, his voice steady despite the panic rising in his chest. Rusty's eyes were wide with fear, his nostrils flaring as he let out a shrill whinny. Ethan held his ground, planting his feet firmly in the dirt. "It's okay, Rusty. You're safe. I'm right here." For what felt like an eternity, the two stood frozen in place. Slowly, Ethan began to reel in the lead rope, his movements steady and deliberate. He spoke in a low, soothing tone, repeating the same words over and over. "You're okay. I've got you." Finally, Rusty's breathing slowed, and his hooves returned to the ground. The horse stood trembling, his head lowering slightly as Ethan reached out a cautious hand. "That's it," Ethan whispered. "Good boy." Rusty allowed Ethan to stroke his neck, the tension in his body gradually easing. Ethan let out a shaky breath, his heart pounding from the adrenaline. "Guess we'll take it one step at a time, huh?" he said with a small smile. The incident stuck with Ethan long after they returned to the paddock. As he sat on the fence, watching Rusty graze, he couldn't help but think about what had spooked the horse. "You've got a lot of scars, don't you, boy?" Ethan said quietly. "Not just the ones we can see." It reminded Ethan of something his dad used to say. A horse doesn't just fear what's in front of them, they fear what's behind them too. Ethan didn't know what Rusty had been through before the auction, but he knew it had left deep marks. If they were going to move forward, Ethan realized, he had to find a way to help Rusty let go of his past. The next day, Ethan approached Rusty with a new plan. Instead of pushing the horse to leave the paddock, he spent hours just sitting with him. He talked about anything and everything, his dad, his dreams, even the bullies at the feed store. Rusty stood nearby, occasionally flicking his tail or nudging Ethan's shoulder as if to say he was listening. Ethan also began using techniques he'd read about in his dad's old ranching books, focusing on trust rather than control. He guided Rusty through simple exercises, like stepping over small obstacles or following Ethan in slow circles. Each success, no matter how small, felt like a victory. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Ethan leaned against the paddock fence, watching Rusty trot around. "You're getting stronger," he said with a grin. "I knew you had it in you." Rusty stopped and looked at Ethan, his dark eyes filled with something the boy hadn't seen before: trust. Weeks turned into months, and Rusty was no longer the frail, timid horse Ethan had brought home from the auction. His coat gleamed under the sunlight, and his steps were steadier, more confident. But there was still a lingering hesitance in his movements, as if he wasn't quite sure of his own strength. Ethan decided it was time to take things to the next level. One afternoon, he walked into the barn and pulled out an old saddle that had belonged to his father. It was worn but sturdy, with the faint smell of leather and years of use. Ethan ran his hand over it, a wave of emotion washing over him. "All right, Rusty," he said, carrying the saddle to the paddock. "We're gonna try something new today." Rusty watched him approach, his ears swiveling curiously. Ethan placed the saddle on the fence and began brushing Rusty's coat, speaking softly as he worked. "You've come a long way, you know that. I think you're ready for this." After a few minutes, Ethan lifted the saddle and gently set it on Rusty's back. The horse tensed, his muscles twitching under the unfamiliar weight. "Easy, boy," Ethan murmured, fastening the straps with careful hands. "It's just me. You're safe." Rusty shifted nervously but didn't pull away. Ethan stepped back, a wide grin spreading across his face. "You're a natural," he said. "Dad would have been proud." For the next week, Ethan focused on getting Rusty comfortable with the saddle. He led him around the paddock, letting him get used to the feel of the leather and the sound of the straps. Rusty adjusted quickly, his confidence growing with each passing day. One afternoon, Ethan decided it was time to see what Rusty could really do. He led the horse to the open field behind the barn, the same one where they'd had their first walk months ago. The grass was tall and swayed gently in the breeze, the perfect backdrop for what Ethan hoped would be a turning point. "All right, Rusty," Ethan said, stroking the horse's neck. "Let's see what you've got." He climbed onto Rusty's back, his heart pounding as he settled into the saddle. Rusty shifted beneath him, his ears flicking back as if to gauge Ethan's weight. "It's just me," Ethan whispered. "We're in this together." With a gentle nudge, Rusty took his first steps. His movements were hesitant at first, his hooves crunching softly against the dirt. But as they made their way across the field, Ethan could feel Rusty's confidence growing. The horse's strides became longer, more fluid, until he broke into a steady trot. Ethan laughed, the sound carried away by the wind. "That's it, boy, you're doing it." As they reached the edge of the field, Rusty slowed to a stop, his chest rising and falling with deep, steady breaths. Ethan leaned forward, resting his hand on the horse's neck. "You're stronger than you think, Rusty," he said, softly. "You always have been." Their progress didn't go unnoticed. One evening, as Ethan was brushing Rusty near the barn, Mr. Harlan, their elderly neighbor, stopped by. He leaned against the fence, his weathered face breaking into a smile. "That's one fine horse you've got there, Ethan," he said. "I've seen him out in the field. Looks like you've been putting in the work." Ethan beamed with pride. "Thanks, Mr. Harlan, he's been amazing." The older man nodded, his eyes glinting with something like admiration. "You remind me of your dad, you know. He had the same way with animals. Always believed in them even when no one else did." Ethan swallowed the lump in his throat, feeling a mix of pride and sadness. "I'm just trying to make him proud." "You're doing more than that, son," Mr. Harlan said, tipping his hat. "Keep it up." That night, Ethan sat by the paddock, watching Rusty graze under the soft glow of the moonlight. The horse's transformation wasn't just physical. It was something deeper, something Ethan could feel in his own heart. Rusty had taught him about patience, resilience, and the power of believing in second chances. As Ethan leaned back against the fence, he whispered into the night, "We're not done yet, Rusty. This is just the beginning." The following week, Ethan overheard a conversation at the local feed store that changed everything. 2 older ranchers stood near the counter, talking about the upcoming junior horse competition. "It's going to be a big one this year," one of them said. "Only the best horses in the county will be there." Ethan's ears perked up. A competition. He immediately thought of Rusty. The horse had come so far, and Ethan knew he could do more. But as quickly as the excitement filled him, doubt crept in. The other competitors would have trained well-bred horses, animals that had never been overlooked or mistreated like Rusty. Still, the thought stayed with him. That night, Ethan brought it up to his mother as they cleared the dinner table. "Mom," he started hesitantly, "Do you think Rusty and I could enter the junior horse competition?" His mother looked at him, her brow furrowed in concern. "Ethan, I don't want you to get your hopes up. Those competitions are tough, and Rusty, well, he's not like the other horses." Ethan set down the plate he was holding and faced her. "That's the point, Mom. He's not like them, but that doesn't mean he's not good enough. I want to show everyone what he can do, and what we can do together." Her expression softened, and she sighed. "If it's what you really want, then I'll support you. But you'll have to work hard, Ethan. This won't be easy." Ethan nodded, his determination unwavering. "I'm ready." The next morning, Ethan walked out to the paddock with a renewed sense of purpose. "All right, Rusty," he said, rubbing the horse's nose. "We've got a lot of work to do." Training began in earnest. Ethan started with groundwork. You're leading Rusty through figure eights and weaving him around barrels to build agility. He set up small jumps made of hay bales, gradually increasing their height as Rusty gained confidence. At first, the horse hesitated, his movements unsure, but Ethan's encouragement never wavered. "You can do this, Rusty," he said one afternoon, standing by the makeshift course. "Just trust me." Rusty pawed the ground, his ears flicking forward. With a nudge from Ethan, he broke into a trot and approached the first jump. Ethan held his breath as Rusty cleared it, his legs folding neatly beneath him. "Yes," Ethan cheered, running over to pat Rusty's neck. "I knew you could do it." Word of Ethan's training spread quickly through the small town. Some people were impressed by his dedication, while others remained skeptical. At the feed store, Ethan overheard the same older boys from before. "That kid really thinks he's got a chance," one of them said with a laugh. That horse was practically on its deathbed a few months ago. Ethan clenched his fists but said nothing. He wasn't doing this for them. He was doing it for Rusty, and for himself. As the competition drew closer, Ethan and Rusty's bond grew even stronger. The horse began responding to Ethan's cues with precision, as if he could sense what the boy wanted before he even asked. Ethan felt a surge of pride every time they completed a new challenge, but he also knew the real test was still ahead. On the day before the competition, Ethan led Rusty into the open field for one final practice. The sun was setting, casting a warm orange glow over the grass. Ethan mounted Rusty, his hands steady on the reins. "This is it, boy," he said. "Let's give it everything we've got." They started with a slow trot, then picked up speed. Ethan guided Rusty through the course they'd practiced so many times, his heart racing as the horse cleared each jump with ease. By the time they reached the final obstacle, a towering stack of hay bales, Ethan could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "All right, Rusty," he whispered. "One more." Rusty snorted, his ears flicking forward as he charged toward the jump. Ethan leaned forward in the saddle, his grip firm but light. With a powerful leap, Rusty soared over the obstacle, landing smoothly on the other side. Ethan let out a triumphant yell, raising his fist in the air. "We did it!" he shouted. Rusty whinnied in response, his steps light and confident as they circled back toward the barn. That night, as Ethan brushed Rusty's coat, he couldn't help but feel a mix of excitement and nerves. The competition would be their biggest challenge yet, but he knew they were ready. "No matter what happens tomorrow," he said softly, "you've already made me so proud." Rusty turned his head, nudging Ethan's shoulder gently. Ethan smiled, his heart swelling with gratitude. "We're in this together, buddy, all the way." The morning of the competition dawned bright and crisp, the kind of day that made everything feel possible. Ethan and his mom loaded Rusty into the old horse trailer they'd borrowed from a neighbor, the metal rattling with every bump in the road. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, twisting his hands nervously. "You're going to do great," his mom said, glancing over at him with a reassuring smile. "Just remember, it's not about winning. It's about showing everyone what you and Rusty can do." Ethan nodded, but his stomach churned as they pulled into the fairgrounds. The place was bustling with activity, riders in polished boots and jackets, their horses sleek and shiny under the morning sun. Ethan felt a pang of doubt as he looked at Rusty. Compared to the other horses, Rusty's scars and weathered appearance stood out. "Don't let it get to you," Ethan whispered to himself as he led Rusty out of the trailer. "You belong here." They walked toward the registration table, where a woman handed Ethan a number to pin to his shirt. "Good luck, young man," she said with a kind smile. Ethan led Rusty to the warm-up area where other riders were practicing. Some of them glanced his way, their expressions ranging from curious to dismissive. One girl on a sleek black mare smirked. "Is that the rescue horse everyone's been talking about?" she said loudly to her friend. "He doesn't look like much." Ethan's face burned, but he ignored her. He focused on Rusty, brushing his coat one last time and adjusting the saddle. "They don't know you like I do," he murmured. "Let's show them what you're made of." When it was finally their turn, Ethan and Rusty stepped into the main arena. The crowd quieted as they entered, and Ethan's heart pounded in his chest. The announcer's voice boomed over the speakers. "Next up, we have Ethan Miller and his horse, Rusty. This pair has a special story. Rusty was rescued just months ago, and now they're here to compete." The murmurs in the crowd grew louder, and Ethan could feel their eyes on him. He took a deep breath, patting Rusty's neck. "It's just you and me, buddy," he said. "Let's do this." The first part of the course was a series of jumps, starting small and gradually increasing in height. Ethan guided Rusty toward the first jump, his hands steady on the reins. Rusty hesitated for a split second, his ears flicking back as if to question whether he could do it. "You've got this," Ethan whispered. Rusty surged forward, clearing the jump with ease. The crowd erupted into cheers, and Ethan felt a surge of confidence. They tackled the next jump, and then the next, each one higher and more challenging. Rusty's movements were fluid, his hooves thundering against the dirt as he powered through the course. By the time they reached the final jump, the crowd was on the edge of their seats. The announcer's voice echoed through the arena. "One last jump stands between Ethan and Rusty, and a perfect round." The jump was massive, a towering wall of hay bales that seemed impossibly high. Ethan could feel the tension in Rusty's muscles as they approached, but he didn't hesitate. "Let's go, Rusty," he said, leaning forward in the saddle. "Let's finish strong." Rusty pushed off the ground with all his strength, his body stretching out as they soared over the jump. For a moment, it felt like they were flying. Then they landed smoothly on the other side, the sound of the crowd's cheers ringing in Ethan's ears. Ethan slowed Rusty to a trot, a wide grin spreading across his face. He patted the horse's neck, his voice trembling with emotion. "You did it, Rusty, you really did it." As they left the arena, Ethan caught sight of Mr. Harlan standing by the fence, clapping enthusiastically. "That's what I'm talking about," the old man called out, his grin as wide as Ethan's. When the scores were announced, Ethan and Rusty didn't win first place, but they received a special recognition award for their bond and determination, and the crowd's applause felt like a victory in itself. People approached Ethan afterward, some offering congratulations, others asking about Rusty's story. As they loaded Rusty back into the trailer, Ethan's mom placed a hand on his shoulder. "I've never been prouder of you," she said. "Your dad would have been too." Ethan nodded, his throat tight with emotion. "We did it together," he said, looking back at Rusty. "He believed in me as much as I believed in him." The drive back to the ranch was quiet, but it wasn't the kind of silence that weighed heavy. Ethan sat in the passenger seat, holding the small recognition trophy they'd received. The faint sound of Rusty shifting in the trailer behind them was comforting, a reminder of everything they had accomplished together. When they arrived home, the sun was just beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the fields. Ethan unloaded Rusty, walking him back to the paddock where their journey had begun months ago. The horse moved with confidence now, his stride steady and strong. He no longer looked like the frail, forgotten animal Ethan had first seen at the auction. As Ethan unlatched Rusty's halter and let him roam freely in the paddock, he leaned against the fence, watching the horse graze. "You know, Rusty," Ethan said softly, We proved them wrong. You weren't just good enough, you were extraordinary. Rusty lifted his head, his ears twitching toward Ethan's voice. The horse walked over to the fence, nudging Ethan's shoulder gently. Ethan smiled, resting his hand on Rusty's neck. "Thank you," he whispered, "for trusting, and for helping me trust myself." Over the next few weeks, the story of Ethan and Rusty spread throughout the town. People who had doubted them came by to see the horse that had defied the odds. Even the bullies from the feed store stopped by, their jeers replaced with quiet admiration. One afternoon, as Ethan sat in the paddock writing in a notebook, Mr. Harlan stopped by. "What are you working on there, son?" the old man asked. Ethan smiled. "Just writing about everything Rusty and I have been through. I want to remember it all, maybe even share it with others one day." Mr. Harlan nodded, his eyes crinkling with pride. "That's a good idea, Ethan. Stories like yours have a way of inspiring people." And inspire it did. The journey of Ethan and Rusty became a symbol of hope in their small town. A reminder that even the most overlooked and broken things can become something incredible with enough patience and love. That evening, Ethan sat on the fence, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant shades of orange and pink. Rusty trotted around the paddock, his once dull coat gleaming in the fading light. Ethan thought of his father, of the lessons he had taught him, and felt a quiet sense of pride. He knew his dad would have been proud too. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Ethan whispered, "This is just the beginning, Rusty. We've got so much more to do." Ethan and Rusty's story reminds us of the incredible power of second chances, patience, and the unbreakable bond between humans and animals. If this story touched your heart, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video, share it with someone who loves stories of hope, and subscribe to Wildlife Stories for more inspiring tales just like this one. Together, we can celebrate the extraordinary connections that change lives.